We are live right now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and we are so excited to have you with us tonight. Rebecca Deng is with us, author of What They Meant for Evil, and it's a story you're going to want to hear. In this day, I've been asked a question so many times for the last 3 months. Why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does God allow evil to happen in our world? Whether that's hatred or violence or disease or just any evil that you can imagine. And you know, we're not coming tonight looking for any simplistic answers to that very complex question, but we are coming tonight with a story to tell. A story to tell. Rebecca is going to just be such a blessing tonight and so open with us tonight and just so loving toward us tonight in her willingness to share the story of kind of overcoming suffering and just the way that the Lord kind of just weaves love and hope even through just the unthinkable layers of suffering that we might endure. She's titled her book, What They Meant for Evil, after a phrase in the scriptures, after Joseph has endured a lot of evil in the book of Genesis, even from his own brothers. And at the end of that story, ultimately, he's able to say in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, what they intended for evil, God intended for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And so please, as you come on to YouTube, Facebook, or our website, let us know that you're there and greet Rebecca and just thank her already for being on with us. And by the way, we have a new platform on our website, www.forty.org/live. You're going to want to check that out at some point. You could check that out tonight in kind of a new format there. And while you come on, and just before I introduce Rebecca, I'm just going to do a little trivia with them because you are one of the lost girls of Sudan. In those years where we were settling the lost boys of Sudan, which was around 2010, 11, right, Rebecca, at that time?
2000.
I'm sorry, my dates around 2000 when Lost Boys of Sudan came. There were about 3,700 Lost Boys of Sudan that came to the United States. Is that correct? Okay, so in your comments, I want you to try to guess tonight how many lost girls of Sudan came to the United States around that time. How many lost girls of Sudan came to the United States around that time? And Rebecca, welcome. And if you just want to kind of give a greeting to kick this off, and then we'll get into our conversation a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Forestry family, for taking your time, your precious time, to come and listen to my story tonight. I really appreciate you, and I know that as a community of faith, a diverse community, we are better together when we listen to our stories, and it is an honor to spend this time with you, and I can't wait to dig into my story and hear more about my life and how God has been faithful through it all and using me now on what I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. We've got Pastor Lonnie Harris with us tonight. He's got his eye on YouTube, looking for comments and questions. AJ Itzel, our stud pastoral intern, with us tonight. Keep an eye on Facebook. Jonathan Ford, behind the scenes, keeping an eye on our website for interaction, comments, and questions. Rebecca, why don't you give the answer? How many lost girls of Sudan were there that settled at that time?
There were 89 lost girls. I heard some people say that 78, but I think 89 is most accurate because we came through different resettlement agencies. Some came through Bethany, some came through Catholic Services and Lutheran. So it's really hard to track down the number, but the latest number I got was 89 lost girls that came.
89. So if anyone guessed 89, congrats, you're the lucky winner. Maybe we'll get you a copy of Rebecca's book and send it to you if you guessed 89 tonight. Rebecca, I want to start with this. You talk in your book about why you chose to write your story. It's a very vulnerable story. You weren't always, that excited to share it, but it was here in Washington, D.C. That the Lord convicted you about needing to tell your story. Could you just share why you chose to tell your story in that experience?
Yeah. So, growing up and here in the U.S., I came when I was 15 in 2000. With the Lost Boys and Lost Girls of Sudan. Actually, that program stopped right away after 9/11. I had friends that were waiting to come to the United States, but the program was just ended. So I was one of the luckiest people to get in. And people have heard my story here and there and asked me to share because they think that as a teenager that was in a foster care system and came as a ESL student and didn't know anything about the United States, and then kind of like by God's grace, making it, and having a master degree or whatever, people were saying that you need to talk to youth, you need to give encouragement. The orphan, I fit any category of being described as somebody that will never make it. I was an orphan, a refugee girl, an immigrant, a ESL student coming to United States that don't have a contact, but only my foster family that helped me. So I always like, okay, maybe one day I will cheer, but it was too painful to cheer because it will mean that I will have to revisit memories of me leaving my village, of me leaving my family that I was living there for 6 years. And in my village, I had 3 meals a day, because I feel like sometimes the part of Africa that we see, which is important to be highlighted, is the part of people suffering starvation, but people don't show part of people having family, having a tribe, people having their cattle, having their food, having their heritage. Nobody cheer that.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to cheer it to show the complete journey of my life. I was having a normal life till I was 6, and then I became a refugee really quickly. And then I came to United States. I became an immigrant, and now I'm an American citizen. But through all of that, there's layers of pain and suffering that happen. So I was like, I will cheer, but maybe not really. And then one day in Washington, D.C., I was at the Native American Museum, and I came around a replica. It's a time bowl replica. And on it, it described that a Native American woman will use a time bowl to record her experience of joy and suffering, experience that are good and that are not, and that she will be the only one to know those. And she can choose to share it with people, or she can choose to never share them, but keep a record. And by the time if they live longer, they might have several time bowls to record the experience. But when they die, they are buried with them. And every time I come to that line, when they die, they are buried with them, I just start crying. And I was like, okay, so today, if I die, I will be buried with my story. And I made a promise that day that I would like to share my story so that it is not buried with me like my family members that I don't know much about. And then again in 2016, that the action took place in 2016 when I was actually watching the news about the children at the U.S. border and, kids that are separated from families. And there's something that just triggered me, that all the flashback came back of me leaving my family, being separated from my family. And I just took my iPhone and start writing over 200 pages on my iPhone, like everything just pour out. So that was a point that I'm like, I'm going to share it. It will be painful, but it is healing for me. And it will give somebody a courage to see God's goodness, even when we don't see it sometime, when we're going through suffering.
Oh, and it will. I encourage you guys, pick up this book, What They Meant for Evil. It's on Amazon and other regular places. But what we've done tonight is try to, summarize your story in kind of 4 movements of your life, 4 kind of chapters. There's many more chapters in here, but tonight, just thinking through 4 big chapters of your life. And I want to kind of jump into your story right now, Rebecca. And of course, you were born in the midst of what they call the Second Sudanese Civil War. I think it's one of the longest wars, civil wars of anywhere in history, from like 1987 to 2005. And you're born in the midst of that. And by the time you're 6 years old, of course, all of that, is becoming very real to you. Why don't you share a little bit about, kind of that first chapter going into the Boer massacre that you describe in your book, and kind of your initial displacement and some of the suffering that you experienced in that season?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So they call it the Sudanese Second Civil War, and actually it started in 1983 to 2005.
Wow.
I was born in 85, so I was born when the war was already happening. But the thing is, my village was safe. I came from a village that is located on the south which is the largest swampland in the world, actually, and it's the size of France. So I was born there. Everything was beautiful, green, a lot of wildlife. And then my dad was one of the SPLA, the Sudan Liberation Movement, that was fighting the Khartoum government, Omar al-Bashir, which was the president of Sudan until last year when he was overthrown, because he's he have done a lot of genocide, the Darfur genocide, and of course South Sudan and Nuba Mountain. So I was born during that time. I heard there was a war, and I asked one day, like, who are we fighting? And they say, oh, they are people from the north. They are red people. That's what I heard. I'm like, so, but where is Khartoum? And they say it's far away from our village. And I was like, wow, that's weird. Why would we fight somebody far away, right? So as a kid, I just have my regular life, growing up, being happy, having my grandmothers and uncles and aunts, which is what we call everybody in the village, and attending ceremonies of wedding or ceremonies of a new birth. I was never invited to go to a ceremony of dead people because in my tribe, they don't allow kids to go there. It's a ceremony that is done by older people. But, when children are born and there's wedding or somebody is sick and people are doing sacrifice, I will go. So that was my life, very stable. As I say early, having 3 meals a day. I come from a Dinka tribe. So we are cattle herders. We have a lot of cows, and then we grow crops, mostly sorghum, which I heard that to grow down south in the United States, and beans and corn and all kind of calabash that we eat. So life was good. And then, that world that was so far away from me, one day reached my village in 1991. Sometime in August or September, I can't know the month that much because I was only 6 years old. And pretty much that day, I would say that I lost about 80 to 90% of everything I have known in my life. So going from protection to all our cattle are gone, and men that I have seen, cousins, have disappeared, they have been killed. And that journey took me and my uncle. So my grandmother was telling me, you guys need to get out of the village. I have seen wars. I have seen tribal wars, and people use spear. But this war that can kill people like this, because it's a gun war, I have never seen it in my life. And you just have to keep going north. That's what she told us. And I say, Grandma, are you coming with us? And she said, no, I will catch up with you guys. And I think now that I think back, it's because, she's a little bit older and might slow us down. So we took off, going to the nearby village, thinking that in a week time, we will come back to our own home. Well, weeks turn into months, and months turn into almost a year now that I find myself at the Kenya border and Sudan border. Then now it's South Sudan. And it was the first time I heard the word refugee, because I was there and I'm like, what is this place? And they're like, oh, we are entering Kenya now, and you have to stay at the tents. They hand out tents, which was so hot. It's like over 110 degrees. And you just get in a tent and you start dripping. And I'm like, I don't like this place. I want to go back home. And they say, well, you can go back home. You are a refugee now. And I remember asking my uncle, what is a refugee? And it's like, it's somebody that is kicked out of the country. I'm like, but why? I thought that we were just leaving for a couple of months and we will be back home. And he's like, well, that's your life now. And so that brought me to Kakuma refugee camp in northern Kenya, which is one of the largest refugee camp at that time. 1992 was open. So I turned 7 right away when I arrived at Kakuma refugee camp. And that refugee camp became overcrowded really quickly, because you had people from Ethiopia, people from Sudan, from Burundi, and then the Rwanda genocide happened. Now I know that was Rwanda genocide, but in a refugee camp, I didn't understand. I just saw a lot of people coming and they say they are from Rwanda and they are now refugees too. So it was a large refugee camp, pretty much depending on the UN and the hospitality of local people. Because the Turkana people, this is Turkana district in northern Kenya. They don't even have a lot going on for them. They are poor. And on top of that, you bring refugees. And pretty soon hostility start between the refugee and the local people, where they pretty much will just shoot you and nobody can help you. And then, so sometimes the Kenyan government will come in, talk to them. The UN will convene them. But that was my life. I was in Kakuma refugee camp for 8 years.
So, Rebecca, I mean, you just said so much that for so many of us is just so hard to even begin to wrap our minds around. And I know you haven't even, unpacked some of the more significant trials that you experienced even in the course of that journey. So I want you, in your book, even just, you do such a good job. I remember as you talk about all the color and the life and the food for the first 6 years of your life. And then, just going into camps and situations where you describe children just looking like ghosts and skin and bones and just, eating just bland food that you didn't even want to eat at first. But if you don't mind, even because I think as we, for me, just I can appreciate this title, What They Meant for Evil, as it speaks of, God using for good, to understand just some of the more details of what you went through. I think it'll just help us to appreciate the extent of God's mercy in your life. And I know some of our people are going to identify with it. So if you don't mind just sharing about, I think, one of the most gripping things to me early in your book was what happened to your mother. And if you don't mind kind of taking us back to your initial fleeing of the camp, but from what I understand, as you were fleeing that camp, or fleeing your village initially during the massacre, your mother was in the process of giving birth. Is that true? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, my mother, there was a small attack that happened before the big one of 91. And so I think it was a year early. And in that attack, we had to leave the village for 2 days to run to the forest. And my mother went into labor. So people were running. And then she was just keep telling us, keep going, and because of complication, there's no hospital and, there's guns, people shooting. She just didn't make it. She had a baby and did not make it. And then the baby probably died like a month later. So that was my first introduction to like, okay, now the war is real. And the war that I have heard being far away. And I think we human beings really do this thing when we hear stories of some people, it just seems so far away from us. But somehow, but we are connected. One day it will come to you. It's just a matter of time. And I think that's why it's so important to address or to be there. But anyway, yeah, he passed, and then the 91 Boer massacre happened, where we were running. But during that running time, as I say,
if I could just even slow down a little bit, because you're doing such a amazing job sharing this. Oh my goodness. But just to allow us just to take in the gravity of what you're just saying. I mean, fleeing this, which I now understand was even a little bit before the big massacre, but an initial time when you had to flee, and then your mother passing in the midst of giving birth. And I think in your book you said that initially that your family named the baby a name that actually means ignored, neglected, and rejected one. And I know that in cultures like yours, you tend to name the baby just according to the circumstances that you're in. But it's such a that really resonated with my heart because as you might recall, our families adopted a few times, and when we initially adopted our son Abram, his name was a name that meant one who causes cursing. And it was really because of very similar circumstances, apart from a war driving his mom out of the village, but similar circumstances there involving his mother. And now, of course, we chose to name him Abram, which is a name that means blessing and one who brings blessing. And, to be able to see God kind of transform his story. And my heart was just gripped, thinking about that moment and just the feeling of neglect and ignoring and rejected, and not just. I mean, ultimately, like whatever whatever your vision and version of God was in that moment, just people feeling neglected and rejected in that moment, and that's just one of those things that here years later, as you write a book called "What They Meant for Evil," implying that God used for good. It's just amazing how even in this initial displacement and trouble, there was some beginning of you sensing His mercy and His love going with you. And I know one of those moments when, as you were fleeing it, one of those times you actually thought you were shot, and had a terrible pain in your leg, and then kind of was able to recover and had the strength to continue on in that fleeing. Is that right? As I read that.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And actually, speaking of my little baby sister that was born at that time, it was the first time that in our family that we didn't have people coming. We have a tradition when a baby is born in my tribe, women will come around, and when the baby first cry, they will start singing. And what they sang is that people are in the home, your land have people, you are loved. People are in the home, your land have people, which is in Dinka, I say, by cheng, panduna cheng, kocha to by. Say that the land or the nation, people are here, you are protected, you are loved, you are welcome. But my mom had a baby without women around to sing that song. And then the baby passed later on. Well, when the baby was given the name, Akon rejected the neglected one because there was nobody even there to welcome the baby. Because in my culture, baby is not just only for the person that give birth to the baby. Baby is a community asset. Yeah. It is a nation thing. So that's why she got that name. And then when she passed, again, I was still loved, because the thing is, like, I think when people ask me, where did you even get that strength as an orphan from a early age? How do you become confident in yourself and loving yourself and not have a self-hate? The answer really lie on my tribal people of not leaving anybody as an orphan. Orphan, the thing is a state of mind. Like, if you are born and your parent die, your uncle is there and your grandpa is there. And if it is not even a distant, a close relative, the community, you are a community a person. You are not your family. Your family job is to give birth to you, okay? But the community job is to raise you, to make you a woman or a man of the tribe. So that's why I didn't even have those feeling of being an orphan. When my mom died, my grandmother raised me well. My uncle were there, aunties from the village. They will play with me. They will do my hair. I was loved. I just never even missed anything of being an orphan. The first time I find out that actually, yes, I'm an orphan now, it was when I was at the refugee camp in Kenya. Yeah. Especially when they give out the identification number, we just have a number and not your name, and you just become a number. Wow. But I grew up reciting my name to the 15th generation. That's how we are told to know your background.
Yeah. I want to get more into that as we even get to that part in your name and just, how you ended up, really understanding a little bit of the next chapter, the next identity that God would have for you. But that's just incredible. So now here you were, your mother has passed. Your father was off fighting, the war. You weren't sure when you were going to see him again. You're longing to see him. Your grandmother, his mother, who was such a faithful caretaker of yours, she chooses to stay back. And so it's really up to your uncle now to care for you. And, I just want to give people a sense of the book and some of the details there, because you're in this fleeing now. I mean, you're crossing rivers and almost drowning in rivers and kind of dealing with crocodiles and just all those kind of epic adventure stuff, we think of sometimes in a good story. But then just the emotional, cries out here as well, or some statements like a time when you saw dead bodies for the first time, and it just shocked you. And one of your aunts, I believe, said, "Why do you go looking for things that you're not supposed to see?" And that line just, wow, just the way that you were seeing so many things that you're not supposed to see, just your innocence kind of being taken. I know at one point you said, I stopped asking questions because no one seemed to hear me, or if they did, they didn't know the answers. And I just think, man, that just resonated with my heart, and I know so many others. And, you're at one point in kind of a UN camp situation, and you have to eat the corn, light the corn. There's no color to it. There's no flavor to it. And your uncle says you have to eat it. That's what you'll be eating for the rest of your life now. And just the sense of this is my life now. Everything that I loved about my life is taken from me. And this is my life now. And yet, of course, it wasn't. So some of that was lies that an enemy wanted you to believe, but not what God had for you. And you just see in your story how He just one step after another still has someone there to care for you, someone there to love you, to help you, to encourage you. But there's one point in the story when you're about a day and a half walk away from the Kenyan border, if I'm remembering correctly, and you're trying to walk with your uncle, and you guys have already been traveling for some time. And am I right to remember that he actually ties like a cloth to your wrist and around his waist or something, so that if you fall asleep, he'll notice you're asleep, because you're just trying to stay awake and walk this whole time, and you're 6 years old, I believe, at the time. And could you just kind of tell that story of what happens on the way to the Kenyan border, and just the amazing, rescue that you experienced in that process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we were crossing to the Kenyan border, they attacked up in the night. And this was a time that the Khartoum government was capturing a lot of towns now in the southern part of Sudan. So we were in a place called Nairuz, and they have captured a place called Torit or Capoeira. And so now they're like, the next one is Nairuz. So we had to run really quick to the Kenyan border. And because it was a nighttime, and we've been working for so long all day, and the sun, I just start getting tired and falling asleep. So my uncle was like, okay, if I tie, a rope or a cloth around her hand, and he tied it around his waist, so that when I fall asleep, he can feel me, and kind of drag me or something like that. But what might have happened, actually, my hand might have been wiggled out, and I lost them for a day. And that's when I described that the first time that I saw a white person is like waking up, whatever, I don't know how long it took for me, but when I wake up and there was a lady and there was a car, which I look up later, and it was Save the Children, that throw us at the back of a pickup truck and was trying to talk to me. And I thought I was dead in a way, because I'm like, am I in heaven? Like, I never seen this kind of person. She was trying to talk to me and the rest of children, and then give us the hydration drinks. It's called chorbamele in Arabic, and which is a salt and sugar mix, and put it in try to let us drink it. But the thing is, because I have been separated for like a day and a half now, going to a second day or a third day, my throat was dry because I haven't been having water. And when I try to drink that, my throat just start bleeding. So she had to like sit down for a while and wait on me. And then as I keep drinking more of that, my body cooling down, literally can feel it in my body cooling down. And then she keeps like, keep drinking. I don't know what she was saying, but she kept like putting the thing in my mouth to keep drinking the water. So yeah, that was that experience. But can I just back up a little bit to talk about those ghost-looking children? Actually, there was a famous photo of a baby that was starving, and there's a vulture behind that baby. Every time I see that picture, I'm like, I wonder if it was one of those children we saw in Bo Town. Okay. Yeah. And that was my first time. Like, I never seen anybody in my village that looked like that or starving. And when I was refusing to eat the corn, which I call the paste corn with no color, my uncle grabbed my hand and literally dragged me to where there were a bunch of children. in a plate that look like that. It's like, if you don't eat this tasteless thing, you're going to end up looking like them and you will die. And I describe in my book that it was the first time I actually eat the paste, the maize, the corn, because it's just a corn and you put it in the water. But in our village, we have milk, you have meat, you have vegetables, and but this was a life in a refugee camp. You only are allowed, which is why I describe that living in a refugee camp is like being on a life supporting machine. Okay. You are not dying, but you are not living. You're just being sustained, next day, And on top of that, that's just physical. On top of that, put things like dreams. Men that once were warrior in their village, men that were collecting food for their families now are reduced to just sit in a refugee camp doing nothing for years. And pretty quickly, you can imagine what can happen to human spirit.
Yeah. Okay, so you've made the journey now through all these things you've experienced in the course of your journey, and then you come to the Kenyan border. You get into the refugee camp. I know you describe it. To me, it just sounded like a desert, just nothing but sand and sandstorms, and you're there with nothing but a blanket at first, and just some of the. Yeah, you're 6 years old, and I remember earlier in the book, you're sleeping in total rainstorms with no covering, and water just piling up around you, and just freezing, and now here you are sleeping in a sand in a sandstorm, and walking as far as you can to go to the bathroom, but often at night not being able to even see where you're walking, and walking through where others have gone to the bathroom, and just it was a week or two before you even had a tent there, just sleeping out in the sand, and so there you are. Now you're in the refugee camp, and you could describe some of that, and then I want to especially talk about. There's a chapter in here that you call Ray of Hope, and it's a strange name for a chapter, considering some of the first things you describe in the chapter. So maybe if you could kind of also take us to that chapter, some of the loss that you experience, and then why you call this chapter a ray of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we arrived now at Kakuma refugee camp. Tents, you can see tents as far as your eye can take you. No bathroom. They never get a refugee camp ready. No bathroom, no hospital. There's pure boreholes where you go and collect your water, and distribution centers, which are where you go and line up. And actually, they are built with a barbed wire. So if people move, it's pretty much like being an animal in a way. If you move, it cut you, and you have to just wait there in line for hours and hours. All of these things were just so overwhelming, and it was nothing. It was a desert. The only animal that was living there was a scorpion, which a lot of people die from it at first because it's poisonous. It's just in a desert. So that was our life for a while. But at the same time, there were no bombs or anti-no bombing us every day. Because now when we are at Kenyan border, Sudan government cannot come and bomb us even if they want, because we are in a different nation. So there was that ray of hope of like not hearing guns every day, and not having, anti-no bomb pouring on us every Sunday, which is what happened when we were running. We will build a church actually on Saturday, and every Sunday that church is bombed, and the next Saturday is built again with grass, and then the next, so become a thing, it's built and then it's bombed, and then it's, but there were nothing of those. At least I was not hearing guns. I was not running for my life physically. But while in a refugee camp, it was a ray of hope that we had a little bit of safety, but the living conditions were just inhumane. So, and then slowly on, they opened refugee school, which were under the trees at first, and we didn't have exercise book. We did not even have pen or pencil. We just used our fingers to write on the sand, labeling it. But children are resilient. To me, not having a constant bombing and people shooting or seeing dead people was a ray of hope.
Wow.
In a way, in that new land.
All right, I've been so into your story that I'm forgetting to check in with people here that are interacting with us. Lonnie, AJ, any comments or questions that you want to pass along from people that are watching right now?
You had mentioned capoeira, and we were chatting about, hey, that's one of the places where Ruben does ministry at, one of our partners there, and yeah, just an amazing story. We're just captivated here. And just also thinking about how damaging, like I'm looking at how Christ is the one who brings rescue. And I was commenting how damaging to a person's psyche and a sense of self-worth and the impact you have in the world when, you're reduced to sitting in those living conditions. And yet, by God's grace in Christ, a person can be rescued from that. And not, and just how amazing that is, how God rescues from the lowest place. And so, yeah. What about you, AJ?
Yeah, just tons of people just sharing how they're encouraged. So happy that you're here sharing your story. Really looking forward to what else you have to say. Really, yeah, you have me on the edge of my seat just listening to your story. Love it.
All right, we're going to keep going then, because it's in the midst of this refugee camp, and we can't imagine maybe feeling any lower at this point. We remember your father's off at war, your mother's died in giving childbirth. You've experienced so much loss already, but then share with us the news you find out in that camp, as you experience even more loss.
So, can you repeat again? Sorry.
Just the next kind of layers of loss that you experience, Rebecca. I mean, my heart's already like, how could anyone endure all of this? Mm-hmm. And then you get, it seemed like, pretty quickly in a row, some more news of lost loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So while there at the refugee camp, I think into our 1 year of staying there, the news start coming of people that didn't make it out of the war. So on top of that, you are a refugee now, you're trying to find your feet, you are sitting, you're not really doing anything. And every single day, every single week, it will be a news of somebody that died. It was there at the refugee camp that I heard that my dad was killed in frontline, in active duty, and a bunch of his brothers and uncles and all of that. And then children that were running with me during the war and didn't make it. We were, listening to people coming and people crying all the time. It was just a mourning for a year or two, where today is this person, next day is this person. And then finally, I heard that my grandmother died, didn't make it. And actually, I have been crying, for everybody that we have lost, everybody that I know, my dear father, uncles. And by the time they tell me, actually, that I remember that day, everybody was so nervous because they know I'm so close with my grandmother. And people just whisper all day. And I'm like, this is weird. I don't know. And then at the end of the day, they call me to come sit down. And they're like, you know what? Your grandmother didn't make it. She died. And I just remember my uncle looking at my eyes, like, I'm like, what? And he's like, grandma died. I'm like, oh, okay, that's all. And people were puzzled. They're like, why is she reformed? Because at that time, I just didn't have any tears left. And I got up and left and didn't mourn for my grandmother until later on in a chapter where I describe here, actually in New York, at a conference that I went to. And they were singing a song, I'm no longer a slave to fear, I'm a child of God. And something happened in my spirit where I left the conference and I just wept all day at the hotel. Wow. For my grandmother. And that's what, these suffering do. You can only, I feel like humanity, God created human to have joy, to have peace. When those things are taken away from her, something happened in her that is foreign to ourselves. Yeah. And just overwhelming. So yeah, with just years of mourning, But the only thing that kept us going was a community coming. Every time there's a dead person, people will come around, cry with you. And I say that in our culture, we don't even use like wiping your nose or using a tissue. Because here in the US, when somebody's crying, the first thing you do is hand them a tissue, which I think was interesting because I'm like, is it saying, oh, put it away, it's uncomfortable. Over there, we just cry and people will use their hand to wipe your face and they cuddle you and you just keep crying and they make you food. So the week that we get bad news, community come and then people come and pray. Yeah. So I think those kind of community loving and caring kept us going during that time.
Just to help us feel some of what you were going through, you write in the book, the names of the dead grew longer every week. At the late evening hours, instead of hearing dancing, singing, or laughter, the mourning voices would overtake the camp, people receiving messages of a beloved one being killed. And, and with each name of someone I knew, I felt more isolated and alone. At 8 years old, my mind struggled to understand so much death and pain and the endless war that brought nothing but fear, heartache, and loss. And then it's in the midst of this chapter also that, called The Ray of Hope, which you commented on a little earlier, but then it's in the midst of this chapter when basically you get invited to church there in the refugee camp, right? Mm-hmm. And tell us about that and kind of your first experience of Christ in church in that way.
Mm-hmm. So actually, Kakuma Refugee Camp was where I became a believer. That's where I find my faith. And it was my friend inviting me, basically saying, hey, you know what? Because there's nothing to do, you just sit around there. Like, we go and dance and something happened. When there's so much traumatic event, it's good to move your body and so dancing become a big part of my life. We go there to go dance. I didn't even understand the Bible. I think there was only one Bible for like over 4,000 people. So I never even touch a Bible myself. I just see it there from a pastor far away talking. And then they start talking of the person of Christ and his history of leaving the village. And I think to me, it had nothing to do with faith, but his journey was captivating to me. Like he left his mother and he got lost. And I become really interested in the Bible, just going every Sunday to listen because I don't have one myself. And even if I did have one, I didn't know how to read or write then. So I start going there. And then I find that the church was the honest place that really addressed what is happening. Because I would say I asked my uncle and aunt, like, why are we going to go back to our village? You say that we will be here for a year turned into 2 years. Now we are into 4 years, 5 years in a refugee camp. What's going on? When are we going back to our village? And nobody responded, but the church was addressing that, like, why do people suffer? And when they say that Jesus Christ was killed and he didn't do any sin, and sometimes we suffer because of sin of others, or a sin that we have seen and didn't fix it, it will kill us. And at that time, I really was just feeling good about myself because when you are a child and the war happened and nobody explained to you about war, nobody had prepared maybe for the war and nobody had tried to explain to me during the war. So it was so confusing. And as a kid, sometimes you'd be like, what's going on? Was I bad to my friends? Why did they die? And all of that. But church become that voice that say that you are loved and God loves you. And sometimes people suffer because of sin of others. Because like at some time you start internalizing it. Did I participate into why our village was burned down? Or, it's just a stupid thing. But as a kid, you just don't know, So church become a really place for me. It was also a place where elders will come and talk to people that are fatherless and motherless and give them advice. So it was not only just a place of worship, but it was a place of counseling, I would say, and a place of empowering each other.
What a light and what a ray of hope there in this refugee camp. And I praise God those kind of situations are still happening in the world today. I read all the time of churches that have a presence in some of the darkest, hardest places in the world. And for, 2,000 years, that's where the people of God have followed Jesus into those kind of situations to make a difference. And just amazing to hear how you experienced that. Now, your uncle at the time, and even though You write much, especially later on, of just the ways that he loved you. But this was a hard thing for him, and he was very fearful of a number of things. And so he began to beat you after you'd come home from church because he didn't want you going. And yet you worked through that and continued to go. You know, that's something I think we need to hear, just about your resolve to continue to encounter Christ. What was it that kept you going, even knowing you'd be beaten for it, Rebecca?
Mm-hmm. I think for me, it was just that peace of mind and peace of finding pieces, like a puzzle, pieces of why do I suffer? Because that was in my mind. Why are our people dying? Why are we suffering? And church was providing that through songs. So it was worth it for me to keep going back, even when my uncle beat me. And now when I look back, it was that time we have been in a refugee camp for 4 years, 5 years, and people will start getting violence, and there were a lot of people that abused children. So he was using as a way of protecting me. Hey, if you go to church, I don't see you, I don't know who is there, don't go. But I'm like, no, this is the only place I find comfort. I'm gonna go, so I will go. And then he come beat me in the evening for going, and then the next day I go again. And then, like, at some point he gave up because he knew that I'm not giving up church. And it was the place that speak to my soul, to the suffering. It was a place of comfort for me. Yeah. And just about dancing too. When we beat the drum and dancing, for a minute, I traveled to a different world, a world of joy.
Wow.
And that was what the church provided for me.
I was just reminded of the scripture that says, you turn my mourning into dancing, you turn my weeping into joy. I mean, the thought of you dancing in that refugee camp, that's something only Jesus could do, isn't it? I mean, I just don't know of people dancing in places like that for any other reason than Jesus. And that's just an amazing picture. So,
yeah. And I was physically poor and mentally and everything, but spiritually was rich. And I think that's what we need to remember as church, that are blessed to have peace, or, physically or, mentally. We need to think of our brothers that are in that situation. They are actually spiritually strong because that's the only thing they have, that's the only hope. And that church that I was describing, it was just under the tree, and it was row and rows of mud, made of mud, and sometimes, so when it rains, it will wash it away and you just sit on a level sand. But it was our community.
Yeah. Amen. All right. So here you are, you're starting to go to some school, I think, and then someone that, cared for you somehow. I forget the connection, but you end up getting an opportunity to go to a boarding school outside of the refugee camp. And yet at the same time, there was this kind of arranged marriage that was happening, and just the great tension that happened there. Could you just tell that part of your story? And then, we're getting to kind of some of the end here of leaving the camp, but there's some key things that happen first.
Yeah, so that's like 99, got my period now, I'm 14. And most people, the thing is like, this lady, a woman, and when you get your period, you are a woman and you can be married off. So this suitor, a lot of them actually came to my uncle and asked his hand for marriage. And then my uncle, one of them was like, okay, you can marry her. But in our culture, you have to pay dowry. But in a refugee camp, where has a man or anybody, where do you find dowry? You don't have a job. You just basically get food to eat. So the guy left to go to Sudan to go look for dowry. And my teacher heard of the sponsorship of, I think it's a Catholic sponsorship that they were giving to children. But mostly you have to pass the KCPE, which is a Kenyan certificate primary school. You have to get a high mark. But I was only in like 6th grade or 5th grade. And my teacher was like, you are bright. I will just talk to them and see if they can get you out. And it was the first time I got out. So I got out in September sometime of 99 to go to a Kenyan school. And it was my first time to actually focus, to actually, start learning more about English and verbs and noun. And I become the third person in a class. They say number 1, 2, 3 to whatever. And I become a third person. And I was just so proud of myself and so happy that I can do this, because in a refugee camp as a young girl, you, even if you go to a refugee school during the day, you go early in the morning, but before you go, you have to get fetch the water, and you come home from the school, you put down your exercise book, and you're going to look for firewood, which is dangerous. It's outside the refugee camp. You can be attacked by local people there, or you go to the distribution center and stand in line for hours to get ration that you receive. You will spend time cooking all day. And then by the time, people eat dinner at 6 o'clock, the sun is already down. And now you just go to bed. You didn't even have a time to look into your homework, even if you do have a homework. So that was a glimpse of light for me to see what a formal education is. And in a Kenyan school, they give us what they call gizeri, which was mostly beans and corns mixed together, but it was constant. We had it in the morning. We had porridge, which is like a breakfast, and then we had that corn bean for lunch and for dinner. And so for me too, I was being fed 3 meals a day, and I'm now in classroom. So no wonder why I did well during that term.
Wow. And then I know, and this is just to give us a sense at this point, just some of the ups and downs in your story, because then you came back and your family didn't let you go back to that school after Christmas break. And then they even put you in another, I think, boarding school, but pulled you out of that to work at home. And you had this dowry situation where this guy was going to come back for you. I think there was a flag on your tent to indicate that you were taken. But God had a banner higher than that over you, right? And had a greater plan. And so sure enough, the same teacher, what a difference maker. Boy, that's something that stood out to me in here. Difference makers are everywhere. And boy, if we can be people that see people like in the situation you're in and look to make a difference, because this person made a difference, and he got you connected to the refugee program, the Lost Boys and Lost Girls program, and you applied and were accepted into that. Long story. I want people I want to save something for people to read in here without giving it all away, but some incredible things happen there where we see God's love and hope, just thread through your suffering. But then even then, Rebecca, you're about 2 days away, I think, from boarding a plane and from starting that journey here to the United States. And just again, another tragedy strikes again. And share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my teacher again become aware of the program Lost Boys of Sudan, and one of the qualifications is that you are an orphan. You would like to go to school. And he told me, you know what, you can qualify for this. Your uncle Fem is raising you. And this man that have left to Sudan to go look for a dowry, this will be a way to escape this post-marriage. I don't believe it. You are only 14, going to 15. I think you are young. You don't even understand what marriage is. And now you are pulled out of school to be able to learn how to cook, to do embroidery, how to make embroidery, being a woman, being prepared to be a woman. And so I applied for that. I got in. We did everything. Coming to United States was long, a lot of screening that they do, multiple interviews. You have to go for disease checkup, STDs. If you are pregnant, your case is ended and you have to start all over again. So we did all of these things. Now I'm ready to go to United States 1 week into it. I'm saying goodbye to my friend. I'm so happy to go to United States. I went 4 days into it. The last test that they did, pregnancy test. Now we are given our tickets. You can leave in 3 days. And then I was assaulted 3 days before I left the refugee camp. And it is one of those things when I look back, I'm like, there's a lot of children that have been raped or abused. And all those years, 8 years, God have protected me. I just didn't get it. Like, why? And after I got my ticket, this is somebody that we knew, So it wasn't a stranger either, but why did he protect me until 3 days before I left? That thing happened. But this is what I say. He put his hand in, grabbed me out, lifted me out of it. It happened. I left the next day to go to Nairobi, and I just came, in a plane coming to United States. My first flight, my first airplane flight. And I just remember being sick the whole trip of what happened to my body and all the, traveling in an airplane. I never traveled before. But then again, I came to the US. My foster family received me at the airport. And I woke up for that first week of trying to understand what happened to my body, not in a refugee camp, in a new place, and not to be able to see that person's face.
Wow.
And who does that? It's only, I don't know where I would be today if I had to wake up every single day and see his face. Because the two things happen. I told you or it's in the book, people can read later on. I had two choices, scream, and then man from my tent killed themselves with the man from his tent, and 10 people die. Or I choose to not scream, and then because I'm leaving the next day. It was one of the, during the war, people make decision for me. But that was the first time I had to make a decision.
Wow.
My uncle was there. He been running in a war. He was there to protect me. Don't go here. We take this path. He make paths out of nowhere so that we avoid seeing dead people. He had protect. But that was the first time I had a choice either to leave my uncle being dead with a lot of brothers, because it's a crime in our culture. And I emphasize that a lot, that when you hear issues of rape and rape as a weapon of war and people, these are not African culture. These are not Sudanese culture. These are culture of war and trauma. People will kill themselves. If you abuse a girl like that, your brothers will kill that person. It's not allowed. So yes, that happened. I arrived in the United States November 6, 2000.
Let me just read a verse that you quoted from Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. And then I was just thinking of, your first choice to scream or not scream in that situation. And yet also one of the scriptures we had talked about from 1 Peter, because of Christ, we can say that God had made his choice of you, all this time, because it says you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you're the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. And that was your experience even in that church there, in the refugee camp, becoming sure of your place in God's family and of your honor at his table. And so now, even in a great picture of God's love for you, you get taken into this foster home as you come, and it's in all places in Michigan, where it's cold in November. And it's so delightful to read of your first experiences there in your new home, because it just reminds me of some of our kids, as we've adopted 3, and especially one older daughter who was 11 when she came home, and it just reminded me of some of our experience with her, and it's just delightful to read. And of course, and we don't want to spoil too much of the end here, but just the love that you find, the support that you find, even once your foster parents discover along with you that you're pregnant and expecting child now. Why don't you give us a glimpse of that whole experience, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So my 3 months into staying in the U.S., I had told my foster mom I'm missing my period, and she's like, you know what? They give us a test that was done 3 days before you left a refugee camp, pregnancy test, because they send them here too. So you are okay. It's pretty much your body getting used to new food, new environment, and you are cold. Well, the first time I saw snow in my life, and actually I thought it was the ending of the world when I wake up and see this powder white thing falling out from the sky. And I was like, why would God bring me across the wall and end the world to end it while I'm there? But anyway, so she's like, your body's going through a lot. And then they were actually expecting with their first child.
Yeah.
And she asked me to come to the hospital she's like, you want to see the baby? I'm like, how can you see a baby? It's like, oh, there's a machine that you can hear the baby heart and you can see the baby. So I got excited. And she's like, I know, I will just ask the doctor, this issue. So we went there, we look at the baby sound and all of that, get excited for my little brother coming. And then she asked the nurse, like, she haven't had her period. It's like 3 months now. And she's like, okay, I can just trying to check. And, I didn't hear what happened, but just, I didn't even have a language to hear it or what. And then, so she's like, touch my, just kind of touch my belly. And she's like, is it okay if I just, I think maybe she felt, I don't know what she did, but she's like, can you lay down a minute? And she like put what I say, the ones right in my belly. And first what we heard was just like the sound, right? And then, so she kind of freeze for a minute and look at my foster mom. And then my foster mom took my foster sister, Teresa, which came like a month after I came to the US and was in a family together with us too. And my foster dad, they left the room. So I was left there with the nurse and I'm like, what's going on? I didn't know. And then she came back in and then the nurse, and then it's like, just keep hearing this sound. So that was when I find out I was pregnant with that day.
Wow.
And it's like, you are pregnant. We came home. I didn't speak that day. But then at the same time, I was like, okay, because I didn't, in Kenyan school, they don't really teach you about your body or all of that stuff. I remember one day teacher talking about it and all the boys turn around, look at us. And I just remember her girl will be looking, we look down the entire time. We didn't even want to hear it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you can be pregnant? I thought that you have to be married and be with your husband for you, So yeah, it was just overwhelming. A lot of things going on in my mind.
Yeah.
And then that evening, I had a gift that my aunt was giving me when I got my period, which is a bead that go around your waist.
Mm.
And I describe in a book, that's when I was like, okay, now I understand, because it was getting tight around my waist. And I'm like, maybe I'm just eating a lot of hamburgers and not being starving, but it makes sense why it was getting tight. And I just ripped it that night, ripped it off and be ready at 15 to be a mother. And now I'm in school, ESL.
So that was a cultural tradition there, the beads around the waist and what that kind of represents?
I think it was mostly a gift, but I think sometimes it just kind of represent like purity until you are married. You have that bead, because there's no way your body will be big.
Yeah.
And you're not making a baby, So
that's neat. Yeah, I was just asking because one of our people was asking about just other cultural traditions that are beautiful in the Dinka culture, and that's just so neat. It's kind of
and at the back of the book too, that's why I have that corset. That corset in a Dinka tradition, I didn't get a chance to wear it. You wear it when you get your first period too in a village, but I left when I was young, and that corset. It represents different generation, and in the beads there's a color scheme, and color scheme will say a millennium or this or whatever that happened in that generation. They will try to make a bead using colors to identify that generation. Yeah. So I just use the turquoise because it's my favorite color, because I don't even know if I was in a village, what were the colors that will be used. Would it be yellow and red or like blues and green? Yeah, I don't know.
there's more examples of some of the beautiful traditions of your culture in here as well, which which can inspire us, and we can learn a lot from as in our own cultures. All right, Rebecca, I know you've been generous with your time. Could we take just 5 or 10 more minutes, and could you just talk to us? Having gone through all this, how did you process? You talk in your book about forgiveness. And just those principles, and what did that begin to look like for you in terms of healing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, forgiveness really is taught in our culture that you have to forgive to move on. You have to forgive to free your spirit, but it did not make sense to me until actually I started working for an organization called American Bible Society. They had a program called Trauma Healing. And that Trauma Healing Institute had a program called She's My Sister, Treasure Her, that was providing mental health principle counseling to victims of rape from the Congo. And at that time, 2014-15, Congo was named as the rape capital of the world, where they were using rape as a weapon of war. And I think it was through reading those women experience, reading the book on healing, and actually understanding that forgiveness is what you do for yourself. It's not what you do for others people. Because those people that hurt people, that enjoy hurting people, most of the time they're not even thinking about people that they have hurt, but they have got you twice. They hurt you and leave you with wounds. And you are also enslaved to them in a way that every single day you are thinking about them and what they have done for you. Meanwhile, you don't even cross their mind. So forgiveness is to freeing yourself, to say that forgiving is not forgetting. And I don't buy in that thing with time. You don't forget things that happen, but you can make peace with them. And so when I understand that, and forgiving too is not to hear from that. You might feel good for closure to hear that person say sorry, but sometimes they might not say sorry. And with things that happen in the war, maybe those people that have hurt you have died, or they are in a different part of the world, or that they are there, but they will never say sorry. Because somehow in the distorted mind, they think that was the right thing, right, to do. So with that time when I took time to heal and actually to look into the wounds of my heart, and that start with like mourning my grandmother. And that start to me being like, okay, these things that happened to me were just so wrong. But God, what you meant for evil, God use it for good, the saving of many lives. What the Sudan government meant for all the 64 tribes from South Sudan, the Dinka tribe, my people, massacring people, bombing them every day, pretty much kicking them out to be refugees, and then coming to United States. Now you have a lot of lost boys and lost girls of Sudan that are in the U.S. military, that are doctors, that are teachers, that are counselors, that are working in development, that are going back home, bringing organization. So what was meant for evil was our brother. The Sudanese are our brothers. What was meant to this group of young children being kicked out, God used it for good. They are building the nation that they have settled in, some in Australia, some in Canada, US, UK, yet they are coming home. They are the one bringing hospital, they are the one bringing a school, and they are the one that are working now as peacemakers, which is one of the things I would like to participate more. And that's why I focus a lot on forgiveness. The men that have hurt me, killed my parent and Sudan government, I have forgiven them. I might not hear from them directly that they are sorry for, and it's impossible for them even to say sorry to me and the rest of millions of lives they have lost. And the thing is, you have those statistics of people that have died, and then you have the side effect, the trauma that you cause people. those things, sorry might not be a right thing for them, but simple forgiveness to say that, okay, these things happened to me. I acknowledge them, they were wrong, but I'm going to move on. So forgiveness is for yourself. It's not for the other person. And forgiveness is not forgetting. It's simply choosing to move on.
Let me just share an illustration that I think could just kind of accompany what you said. And it's from your book, as you were talking about early in your life, experiencing sacrifices in your village together with your people. And that when people would return from war, because they'd have such a sense of guilt, because of who they had killed when they were off in war, people would return from war, and the first thing they would do, even your family, before they could greet you and hug you and touch you, right, if I recall, was they had to make sacrifice. And they would often sacrifice a cow from what you described. And then they would literally jump over that cow in the midst of that sacrifice in order to be clean. And that was their way of coming to cleanliness, their way of coming to purity, their way of experiencing forgiveness, of themselves. And that's just quite a picture of often what we feel like we have to do. You say, oh, that's just such a strange, faraway tribal idea. Oh, my goodness, no. We come with our own guilty consciences, and we find all kinds of cows to jump over, things that we feel like we have to do to make things right, to get things better, to improve ourselves, things we feel like we have to do to punish ourselves, to feel the pain that we've caused to others, to stay in the pain that we've experienced from others. And Rebecca, right, isn't that why Jesus died on the cross in the first place? To pay the penalty for our sin, to become sin for us. Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. And this sense of sacrifice that is in every culture, this need to make things right when they're wrong, even when we've participated in wrong, that Jesus came and sacrificed once for all so that we could be free from that need. We could experience his forgiveness and stand in his forgiveness and be forgiven through simple faith in him, to receive his sacrifice and not try to do, a pile of good things ourselves or make up for that which we've done wrong, or force others, in the same way to somehow make up for what's been done, but just to receive Christ's forgiveness and to give it to others. And boy, if there's anyone watching tonight, having heard the story from Rebecca, I hope you know that you don't have to jump over any cows. You don't have to jump through any hoops, that Jesus went all the way for you to the cross. He said, it is finished when he was on that cross, because sacrifice for sin was finished, done, paid in full, and that he invites us simply to believe and to receive what he's done, having died and risen again. To all who received him, to those who believe in his name, he gives the right to become children of God, to have a seat at his table forever, to be part of his family, to have sins forgiven. And boy, if you haven't come to that assurance, if you're still trying to jump over some cow and it just feels really far away from God, just know that he came near to you so that you could call on Jesus and experience that forgiveness that Rebecca has and can now even extend to others. Rebecca, as I think about that, and now having understood God's forgiveness, for you, and being willing to extend that to others, now you have kind of a ministry of, coming alongside of others who have been through trauma. And I want to encourage people to check you out with regard to that. First, to get your book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, kind of all the regular places. But then they can check in with you on Twitter. Look for Rebecca Deng. I think it's at Rivka, Rivka, Deng, Deng. And also Facebook and Instagram. And are just other ways as we close that you want to invite us to connect with you or to learn more about your ministry in any way?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, the best way will be really the way you can support me is to buy the book. There's a lot of stories there, cultural artifacts. If you want to learn about others' culture, how to deal with trauma and how to give ourselves space. Our God. Give us a space to heal and give us a space to mourn when it's a mourning time. And what I like about that picture of people jumping over the cow, I remember I want to cheat it all the time. I want to just go greet my father. But my grandmother will hold my hand and say, your dad and his soldiers were in the war. When soldiers go fight, we don't know what world they enter to. And so they had to jump over the car before they greet their children, before they greet the women. And during that time, it was a time of waiting and a time for my dad and his soldiers to reflect and time of the community to receive them too. And that's what Christ done for us. He's our last sacrifice. But we need to take time too when we sleep, when we know we are not clean, to take time to look deep inward in our hearts and take that short time to reflect. I think that's what I will add. By the book, the audio one was narrated by C.D. Loloka. She's a South African princess. She's the leading voice of the Lion King musical. She's beautiful. She did a wonderful job of narrating the book. So the Kindle one, if you want to listen and read, and of course, if you need a hard copy, that will be a good way. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Rebecca Deng, and Twitter. And we'll keep in touch. Just pray for me. I have a dream to have a ministry to refugees, girls or children, to kind of create some sort of something where they can have joy, where they can be exported in their mind, either through education or some activities. Because like refugee camp is not going to end. It will not end soon, but we can be there. We can be those bridges that come in and give them opportunities and dream, and give them a little bit of joy where they can. Children are resilient, and I have that heart. Even in a refugee camp, it was hard with all of these things. But you know what? When I play with my friend and was dancing at the church, I find joy. So there's a way to come into a suffering and lift people and show people joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Pastor Lonnie, AJ, just a final comment or question. I know perhaps there's been some desire to interact. We've just enjoyed Rebecca's story a lot tonight. But anything that you want to highlight, Lonnie and AJ, before we get off?
And AJ?
Just so many people. Just thanking you, Rebecca, for sharing your story. One of Margaret, one of our church members, said that it took courage to revisit those painful scars. So she's thankful that you shared your story tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret.
Powerful message of that. I love the thought, especially in the season that we're in right now in this country, just to think that forgiveness is not for the person who hurt you, but for you. And just the thought that I love the fact that you've learned that you can be well. You've moved from victim to victor, and that's not dependent on being able to face those who hurt you. That God has given you the space to be able to do that through Christ, and so it's great.
And boy, you feel like you heard a lot of stories tonight, but there's so much more in here. I'm trying to pick and choose what things to highlight along the way, because there's just more to get out of the story. So please do that. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight. Let's stay in touch with Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. And God bless everyone. That kind of wraps us up for tonight. And we're looking forward to much more relationship with Rebecca going forward. And thank you, Tim and Sue Bladick, for helping to make this connection and making this possible tonight. They lead our orphan ministry here at Forsey, and they just have such a heart for stories like Rebecca's to be told. And they've experienced just so much in their own journeys and some of their own adoption journeys. And that's a heartbeat. Boy, I hope that's a takeaway, is that there's a lot of ways to make a difference in this world, but opening up your heart, opening up your home to those that need one is something that followers of Jesus on every corner of the earth have done and continue to pray about doing. It's part of the hospitality God's called us to, the difference he's called us to make. And so just a lot to reflect on tonight. Let me just ask you, what is God asking you to take away from this? What does he want you to take away and do? Let's not just walk away and say, wow, that was a great story. Wow, that was inspiring. Wow, I can't believe it. No, how is the Spirit of God speaking to your heart? What is he leading you to do in response to what you've heard? Lord, I just pray that you'd help us to hear that question and to hear your cry. Lord, as real as you were to Rebecca in the midst of just what she went through at every corner and every chapter, Lord, you are seeking to draw us to you, to heal us, to heal our wounds, to heal our heart, to call us to a purpose in Christ to make a difference. Lord, speak to our hearts and lead us. And we thank you. Bless Rebecca, Lord. Raise her up. May her story just ring out, Lord, around this world. May it give hope to others. Lord, to hear her and to recognize that all that was meant for evil, that you've used for good to accomplish a greater thing, Lord. Oh, God, that's just what we stand with her and believe tonight. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Good night, everybody.